At 5 in the morning, the North Sea is already throwing everything it has at the rig. Wind is pushing past 80 miles an hour, rain is hitting the windows sideways, and waves are breaking against thousands of tons of steel below. But inside the accommodation block, an offshore worker is waking up for another shift. There is no commute, no drive-through traffic, no walk from a parking lot to an office. His workplace is already moving beneath his feet. He gets dressed, pulls on his offshore gear, and steps into a corridor where other crew members are starting their own shifts. Some have just finished working, others are heading to breakfast. The rig doesn't have a morning rush because it never really has a quiet hour. Outside, the weather's getting worse. The helicopter that normally brings people on and off the installation may be grounded. Outdoor work can be restricted. Equipment on the deck has to be checked and secured. But the crew still has a job to do. That's one of the strange things about working offshore. A storm doesn't automatically mean everyone goes home. There is no home nearby. For weeks at a time, this rig is where they work, eat, sleep, and spend almost every waking hour. The crew operates around a rotating schedule, with some workers heading into a 12-hour shift, while others finally get their chance to rest. And on a day like this, that routine becomes even more important. Because the real question isn't whether the North Sea can produce an 80-mile-per-hour storm. It can. The question is, how does an entire crew keep a massive oil rig running when the sea outside is trying to shut everything down? To understand that, we have to start with the first few hours of their day. By 6 in the morning, the accommodation block is starting to come alive. Some workers are already finishing their shift. Others are just getting out of bed and making their way toward the galley. The corridors are narrow, the walls are lined with pipes and equipment, and there is no real sense of morning or evening once you're offshore. The weather outside may be getting worse, but breakfast still has to happen. Inside the galley, hot food is being prepared for people working different schedules. One group might be sitting down to eat while another is already several hours into a shift. That routine matters. On an offshore installation, people can't simply stop for lunch whenever they feel like it. The rig has to keep operating, so meals are organized around the work schedule. After breakfast, the next stop is usually preparation for the shift. Coveralls are checked. Helmets go on. Gloves, boots, and other protective equipment become part of the uniform. Before anyone heads into a working area, the crew needs to know what is happening around them. And on a stormy day, that information becomes even more important. The weather forecast is reviewed. Conditions around the installation are discussed. Any work affected by wind, waves, or poor visibility has to be considered before the crew heads out. Then comes the handover. The crew coming off duty passes information to the people taking their place. Equipment that needs attention, maintenance that is still underway, unusual readings and safety concerns all have to be communicated. Nothing about this looks particularly dramatic. There is no siren, no emergency announcement, just people drinking coffee, checking equipment, and getting ready for another 12 hours of work. But that's what makes offshore life different. The rig doesn't depend on one person working all day. It depends on a chain of crews handing responsibility from one group to the next without losing track of what is happening. By the time the morning shift leaves the accommodation block, the rig is already fully awake. Control rooms are staffed, machinery is running, maintenance teams are moving through their assigned areas, workers are heading onto the deck, and somewhere outside the North Sea is still building. The morning is over. Now the real shift begins. By 8 in the morning, the crew had spread across the rig. The quiet routine of breakfast is gone. Now everyone has a specific job, and every part of the installation depends on those jobs being done properly. Some workers head toward the drilling or production areas. Others move into maintenance, electrical, mechanical, or control room operations. On the deck, crews inspect equipment, handle tools, and keep an eye on systems that have to keep working regardless of what the weather is doing outside. Inside the control room, operators watch the numbers: pressure, temperature, flow, equipment status. A normal reading might not seem important to anyone standing outside, but offshore, a small change can be the first sign that something needs attention. That is why so much of the work is routine. Workers inspect equipment before there is a problem. They check valves, lines, pumps, electrical systems, and machinery. They clean, lubricate, tighten, replace, and test whatever needs attention. It can be repetitive, but repetitiveness is exactly what you want when you're responsible for equipment operating far from shore. Outside, the wind is becoming harder to ignore. Rain sweeps across the deck, visibility drops, and the sea keeps building beneath the platform. Workers have to move carefully, follow designated routes, and stay within the limits set by the safety team. The storm hasn't stopped the rig. It has simply changed the way people work around it. Some outdoor tasks can continue, others have to wait. Non-essential work may be postponed, while critical systems receive priority. And nobody is making those decisions based on what the weather looks like from a window. The crew is working from forecasts, instruments, communication systems, and constant updates from the people responsible for monitoring conditions. That matters because an oil rig isn't one giant machine operated by a handful of people. It's a collection of systems, departments, and crews that have to work together. One team might be maintaining equipment, while another monitors production. Someone else is handling safety checks, while the control room keeps track of the installation as a whole. And all of them are working against the same clock. Their shift doesn't end because the sea gets rough. But by midday, the weather's becoming difficult to ignore. The waves are getting larger, the wind is picking up, and the crew is beginning to prepare for the part of the day when the North Sea becomes the most important thing on the rig. The storm is no longer just outside. It's starting to change everything happening on board. By midday, the storm has become impossible to ignore. The wind is pushing hard across the installation, rain is sweeping over the deck, and the sea below is beginning to look less like an ordinary working environment and more like a wall of moving water. For the crew, this is when preparation matters. Outdoor work is reviewed. Equipment that could become a hazard in strong winds is secured. Access to exposed areas may be restricted, and tasks that aren't essential can wait until conditions improve. The rig doesn't simply shut down because the weather is bad. Instead, the crew changes the way it operates. Inside the control room, workers continue watching the systems that keep the installation running. Weather information is constantly updated, and the people responsible for safety have to decide what work can continue and what needs to stop. Outside, the difference is obvious. The deck is wet, wind makes movement more difficult, spray can reach areas that would normally stay dry, and visibility can change within minutes. This is why offshore workers don't treat a storm like something to simply tough out. They work within limits. If conditions become unsafe for a particular task, that task waits. If helicopter operations aren't safe, the helicopter stays on the ground. If a section of the deck becomes too exposed, workers stay away from it. The goal isn't to prove that the crew can work through anything. The goal is to keep the installation and the people on it under control while the weather passes. And the rig itself is built with severe weather in mind. Depending on the type of installation, its structure, supports, mooring systems, and other equipment are designed to deal with the forces created by wind and waves. But engineering only solves part of the problem. Someone still has to monitor the conditions, someone has to inspect the equipment, someone has to make the call when a job is no longer worth the risk, and someone has to remain ready in case the situation changes. By late afternoon, the storm has turned the outside world into a completely different place. Yet inside the accommodation block, something surprisingly ordinary is about to happen. People are getting hungry. The next crew is preparing to eat, and eventually someone will have to go to bed. Because even when the North Sea is at its worst, the people living on the rig still have to do the most ordinary things: eat, rest, and sleep. By 7 in the evening, another crew is taking over. For the people finishing their shift, the day isn't over exactly. Their work may be finished, but their routine continues just like everyone else is on the rig. First comes dinner. Inside the galley, workers sit down for a hot meal while the storm continues outside. There is something almost strange about the contrast. Beyond the walls, the North Sea is throwing heavy waves against the installation. Inside, people are eating, talking, drinking coffee, and catching up with co-workers. Meals are scheduled around the shift system, so the galley has to keep serving people at different times. Someone might be having dinner while another worker is just starting a 12-hour shift. For the crew, food isn't only about getting enough calories to work. It's one of the few parts of the day that feels normal. Then eventually, it's time to head back to the accommodation block. This is where offshore life becomes surprisingly different from what most people expect. The cabins are compact, personal space is limited, and 2 workers may share the same room while working opposite shifts. That arrangement can actually make sleeping easier. When one person is working, the other can use the room to rest without having a roommate moving around at the same time. Blackout curtains can make the room feel like nighttime even during daylight hours, while earplugs help block some of the constant sounds coming from the installation. But the rig never becomes completely silent. There is always something running somewhere. Fans, ventilation, pumps, machinery, doors opening and closing. And during a major storm, there is another sound, the wind and sea outside. Yet after a long shift, exhaustion can be stronger than all of it. A worker can lie down, pull the blanket over himself, and fall asleep while the same storm that has everyone outside watching the weather continues around the rig. That doesn't mean the crew is unaware of the danger. Quite the opposite. They've already been briefed. They know the conditions. They know which areas are restricted and what procedures to follow if something changes. They've also trained for emergencies that could happen offshore. So while one group sleeps, another group is working. Someone is watching the systems. Someone is maintaining equipment. Someone is standing by for an emergency. And someone is simply trying to get a few hours of sleep before doing it all again. That's the strange rhythm of offshore life. The storm doesn't stop the clock. It just becomes part of the day. And while one worker sleeps through the worst of it, another crew is awake, keeping the rig running through the night.